All right, guys. Here we go. We got one more day of notes to get ready for your test, which will be this week, this Thursday. So make sure you get all your notes together, and we'll get you a review sheet here soon too. Wanted to show you a quick map of Asia. So here you'll see like Russia and India. Here's China that we just talked about, and Mongolia, which eventually, if you remember, under Genghis Khan, he'll conquer pretty much all of this land. Here's Korea. See that? And then here's Japan that we're talking about. Japan, is four major big islands, but it's also made up of thousands of different islands. But I wanted you to see a picture of it so you can kind of get a feel for what we're talking about. All right, so here's our notes, guys. The geography of Japan was made up of a chain of thousands of islands. I know there's four big ones, but there's actually thousands of little ones. And on these islands, there are mountains and volcanoes. Mount Fuji being the largest of these volcanoes. It's a beautiful snow-covered mountain, but it's also an active volcano. Because of all this, there's only about 20% of the land is actually farmable, which you can understand was probably created a lot of problems with how they're going to get their food and what they did for a living. The four major islands are Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. Those are the islands that you did map yesterday. And these are where the majority of people live. Pretty obvious if just like Greece was made up of islands and had lots of mountains and rocky land. And so they did a lot of fishing for food, which they still is one of their main parts of diet. And they also, the merchants traveled from village to village and traded, even from island to island. And they traded to get their goods and resources and supplies that they needed. So obviously, because of the islands and the mountains, they were isolated. They had to develop an independent society with a very distinct culture from other cultures. They were influenced by China and Korea, but once they created their own culture, they were very isolated and separate from everybody else. Okay. The religion in Japan, there's two major ones, Shinto and Buddhism. But it all started with this idea called animism, the belief that all natural things are alive and have spirits. So the wind and the mountains and the rivers and the rain and the trees, all those things are actually spirits, and they all are alive, and it's something you would pray to. And these spirits, these nature spirits, are called kami. Okay, and they actually would build shrines, which you'll still see today out in the woods and even out in the water and up in the mountains. These were holy places to honor the kami or the spirits. So this whole idea of kami and animism the Japanese create their own religion called Shinto, which means way of the spirits. It's still a very important religion today. That's the major religion in Japan. Another religion shows up, which is called Buddhism. It starts in India and then it works its way into China, into Korea, and then eventually comes to Japan. And it's very popular among the poor and the working class people because it offers a sense of relief from your suffering. And so they liked it very much. And the very wealthy, elite landowning people didn't like Buddhism. And it caused a lot of conflict in the government, so much so that they ended up moving the capital city to what is today Tokyo, basically because they didn't want to have Buddhism anymore. The wealthy nobles didn't want it. All right, so moving on. You'll notice now that you're going to be writing your answers on the left. It's the same thing, just a little less to right. But let's go through this. There were some major issues, a lot of war, because remember, there's only 20% of the land that is farmable. And so people are always trying to get their hands on farmland so they can feed their people. A lot of long series of really weak emperors, so much so that the nobles began to take control of Japan because they would get armies and go to war. And you just can imagine kingdoms were fighting other kingdoms all the time. There was one major civil war called the Genpei War, which lasted about 10 years. And it was a civil war between two powerful Japanese families or clans, the Taira and the Minamoto family. And after 10 years of fighting and lots of death and destruction, the Minamoto family wins. Now, the emperor at the time was a little nervous that the Minamoto, their leader, was going to become emperor. like take over his rule. So the emperor says, no, I'll do something. I'll call him Shogun. He gave him this title, Shogun. He said, you just be in charge of my army. Well, that was a mistake because that gave then Minamoto way too much power. And the shogun actually became the actual rulers. And the emperor really lost his power at that point because the shogun was in charge. Years and years and years later, you still have shoguns that are ruthless and horrible to their people. They appoint these samurai or these knights to run the provinces, like the states of Japan, the kingdoms, and it's a real mess. During this time, too, the Mongols then attack Japan. And luckily, because Japan wasn't very organized and unified, luckily the Mongols are unsuccessful. They're led by Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, but they're unable to land their ships. They try twice, two separate times. Some would say coincidence. Some would say, right, that maybe the spirits came and saved them. But these typhoons or these horrible like hurricanes that were called kamikaze came, and because that happened, the Mongols couldn't land their ships. And that word kami meaning nature spirit and kazi is typhoon. That's kind of the nickname that was given. It was this thing that protected the Japanese from the Mongols. So they developed feudalism during the Middle Ages, just like Europe did. You had powerful military lords who received land from the king or the emperor. These lords were called the daimyo. They were noble. They were born into that class. They would raise samurai or knights to protect the land, and then these guys built huge armies to protect these lands. The samurais were the warriors who did that. They also were known as vassals, just like in Europe. And these vassals, they were samurai who fought for the daimyo, and then in return, they got land from the nobles. Okay, so the vassals were samurai, and the nobles were the daimyo. This whole system is called feudalism. The samurai gave an oath of loyalty to his daimyo in exchange for land. And of course, the bottom class of people were the peasants and the merchants, and then below them you had their slaves. And then the samurai, the knights, had their own code of conduct, just like the knights had their code of chivalry. And basically, they had to be loyal to their master, courageous and honorable. And the samurai were very well trained and very well armed military men. So that's a system of feudalism that was in Japan, a lot like that in Europe. And put these in your binder, get yourself all ready, and we're going to have a test on Thursday. All right. See ya.